Welcome back, and thank you for that before. Right, we're on item 27, I'll take it. Yeah. Item 27, freedom camping. Welcome. And would you like to just talk to us first, and then we'll get on to which options we like and those sorts of things? Is that okay?
Sure, absolutely. So I guess this report is, basically it provides two options for Council to consider. One is that we continue to use existing regulations on a case-by-case basis to deal with freedom camping issues as they arise. And we do discuss some of the positives and negatives associated with that option in the report. The second option is to develop a district-wide approach through a freedom camping bylaw. The pluses and negatives we do also discuss in the report. Clearly a district-wide bylaw does provide you with the option to produce a coherent regulatory approach using a specific piece of legislation exactly for freedom camping. I guess the negatives are that it doesn't guarantee that you can respond on a case-by-case basis quickly, although of course we could go back to the existing regulatory methods for that. And it doesn't guarantee that you can actually use the infringement fines, mainly because people may leave the country before paying for their fines. The first option, which is to continue using the existing regulations, the negatives for that is that I guess it's the opposite really, in that it doesn't give you the opportunity to be coherent, a consistent district-wide approach. But it does allow you to respond immediately in the short term to new freedom camping problems as they emerge. The downside that I didn't mention with the first option, case-by-case basis, is that of course there is the risk that you may be moving people from one place to another. So obviously there's been a lot of work done over this summer around monitoring and enforcement, and in particular, of course, the monitoring officers have played a very successful role in their educative and providing information. They have also gathered a lot of data that helps us to come to the position where we can assess the situation, and particularly around putting in a freedom camping bylaw, because there is quite a significant amount of data will be needed to be gathered, and probably a survey done around some of the impacts both on the physical environment and on the social and demographic issues.
Can I suggest that we first of all and then get into the option 1 or 2? Is that okay? Yeah, Glenn. Oh, was there a question?
Yeah, question.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. On page 445, in relation to the Freedom Camping Act, it talks about that if the council wishes to make a bylaw, it must meet one or more of the following purposes. And then it goes
Yes.
Roman numerals 1 to 3. My view is that actually those 3 have been met, or criteria have been met already in terms of justifying one, in my experience. Would that be your understanding from the information you're receiving as well?
At this point, I would have to say that to a large extent the monitoring report indicates that yes, especially around health and safety of people and protecting access to the area.
I can give you plenty of information over there. So, yeah, thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Phil. Then Andrew.
I've got a question. It's really around, is there more we can do to be proactive really in terms of just so that people are aware of where the facilities are, but also the responsibilities, that kind of thing. I know that the enforcement team work hard on that, but I'm just wondering, is there another wider, could that be scoped more widely?
More education.
So we are we're tapping into a number of sources about educating where the right kinds of places are to freedom camp, and there's a number of really predominant maps that are being accessed by freedom campers. I was talking to one of the providers this morning, and they have a huge number of hits, 4,000 hits on their app, and a huge number that have been downloaded to actually be able to inform you of where you are needing to freedom camp. So there's that educational level there too. There's a combined agency approach to sending the right messages for freedom camping across DOC, across Christchurch City Council and other agencies too, which really talks about first and foremost, go to the right place to camping grounds and that sort of thing to freedom camp, and then identifies the areas through some of these apps or maps around where freedom camping can legitimately occur. A lot of that is all steering people into legitimate camping ground areas, but of course we know that there's a preference not to go there. We've got educational flyers that go out and they've been handed out with every conversation that we have with a freedom camper on the ground. So when guys are out there doing that, they're giving that information out.
Thanks. One sort of supplementary question, like it's great that all that is being done and the information is there. I'm just wondering, do we say, and I'm aware that not all freedom campers, for example, use private rental van companies for their vehicles, but would we also, for example, ensure that information is with rental vehicle companies?
Yes, yep.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Andrew, then Pauline.
Thank you. Option 1 is doing the same as we've done this last summer. I mean, where I'm coming from is kind of not wanting to go as far as a bylaw, but wanting to do more than we have done this summer. Is there more resource that we could commit, or more enforcement or more monitoring we could be doing? And if we did, would that, from what you've seen so far, have a greater effect, a kind of option 1 plus, if you like?
Yeah, there's always the potential for more resource to put into this. I think with under the main provisions of the Freedom Camping Act, of the 850 observations of freedom camping, we haven't actually observed anybody doing inappropriate toileting, disposing of waste inappropriately, all of the things that the communities are bringing up. And that's despite, being there in the morning or being there in the evening to see that. So educating's one thing. I think it's actually more around telling people and being very specific where self-contained camping needs to be, where the prohibited areas are in our district, where the permitted areas are with particular conditions for self-contained and non-self-contained freedom camping.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just one other question, if I can. I note in your report there have been 11 calls into the customer service area, 11 requests for service. That is a lot less than I would have expected, given the number of calls, emails, contacts I've had as an elected member, and I'm aware that other elected members have had, raising freedom camping issues. So have you considered, we talk about education for campers, but is the consideration of education for residents around what they should do if they find what they consider to be inappropriate freedom camping going on? And has consideration been given to something like, for example, a hotline or a specific resource to deal with those complaints as they come in, so that people are more aware of what they need to do to lodge a complaint and how that complaint would be dealt with once it came in?
No, I think that's a great idea, and we can certainly take that and feed that out to the community. It's definitely, at the moment, it's through the call centre, but we obviously receive a lot of emails directly into the unit, and we, more often than not, try to log them as CSRs. So, I think that's a great idea, and we'll do that.
For example, we could add to option 1, you could develop a communications plan, a much more wider focused communications plan.
Yeah, and that's around how we deal with the campers, but it's also about how we communicate with residents about what they should do if they encounter a situation they're not comfortable with.
Bearing in mind a lot of freedom camping that occurs is actually really legitimate when you look at the various regulatory mechanisms in place. They're actually legitimately camping. It's just the perception of litter and rubbish and where that's being deposited, and what the multi-million-dollar question about where are these people toileting if the facilities are closed overnight. So, absolutely. I think got a really good flavour from the complaints that we have had around the effect that it's having on local communities.
Thanks, Pauline.
And when it is a broad spectrum, and I think one of the deputations we had this morning was focused around New Brighton Central, and is it up on the ramp there, is it then? Which is quite different. And my question is on page 444, where we've already got in 5.6 the Traffic and Parking Bylaw 2008. It must be easier to amend a bylaw than to create a new one?
Yes.
Yeah. So would there be an opportunity to perhaps work on this so that where you've got it's illegal for a camper van to be parked in one place for more than 7 days? I mean, perhaps that could be amended to reduce that time. I don't know, just ideas that perhaps staff would possibly come up with some, but would that be a feasible avenue to perhaps go down?
Yes.
And when was the traffic parking rule last amended?
Well, it has just been done earlier in the year.
I thought
But
it
an
was
amendment, you can do minor amendments
time.
over time. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if we want to perhaps look at that
Amending
as,
the existing bylaws.
yeah,
Yeah.
and looking at using that as a tool, together with educating people on what they can do if they see persistent parking for a long time in one place, where they report that, and then how we process that data.
Okay,
Yeah, sorry.
Tim and then Ralph.
Thank you. Really interested to hear from the information that you got from actually monitoring it, that there's no evidence of toileting, etc. So really interested in that. The other one is the 4,000 hits on the app. I mean, these people are visitors to our city, and we do need these visitors. We do need them to spend money here to help the local economies, not just in the usual tourist traps, but in Brighton, if they're there, they can go shopping at the local shops, etc. But it's about, no question about how we manage that, to perhaps kind of curb that, where we allow them to do that. If we say where they're going to Freedom Camp must have toileting facilities or things like that, because it seems if you're not finding evidence of that type of thing happening, then is it a perception, or is it just that we're not picking it all up?
No, when I say we're not catching people in the act of toileting, that's what I'm saying. There's certainly evidence of toileting occurring, not in the usual places, but that's always been the challenge, is catching that person undertaking that activity at their time. So, it is obviously preferable that they're disposing of waste in the right kinds of places like toilets.
So if they were camping in a facility that does not have a toilet, it seems ridiculous that we will allow it, because the odds are they will do toileting, and even washing dishes or brushing teeth, as we'd heard. These are things that we've got to be concerned about, surely.
Yes, it's back to those basics: water, toilets.
Yeah.
Yeah. And bearing in mind too, though, that if you look at some of the other bylaws or tools that are being used by other territories, they distinguish between self-contained and non-self-contained units. So, and self-contained is prescribed under a standard. It requires that you have to have 3 days worth of water on board. You've got to have your toilets. You've got a waste facility on board that you dispose of appropriately. So lots of the bylaws, and I had a really good review of a number of them, that particularly in the coastal local authorities, because it's kind of what's happening here. It's a coastal situation, be it at Akara or be it down New Brighton or at Sumner. They have lots of different kinds of conditions and options around how people go about freedom camping in a self-contained situation or a non-self-contained situation.
Okay, thanks. I've got Ralph and Glenn.
Do you think option 1 is going to be strong enough to deter freedom camping? I mean, let me add to that. I mean, I just don't think we're being clear enough with people that freedom camping is not tolerated within the city. And I don't know if we're getting that message out, because I mean, the way social media works these days, once people hook onto something, everyone knows about it.
A bylaw is much more specific. It is very clear for everyone. It provides that clarity. It's specific legislation geared up exactly to deal with freedom camping. whereas the rest of it we're cobbling together on a case by case.
And what are we doing with the rental companies that are hiring non-compliant vans?
So non-compliant vans as in self-contained.
As in not self-contained?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that they're not non-compliant, it's just that they're renting out a vehicle that hasn't got a self-contained facility in it. So we can push more of the education through there and also target the freedom camping profile, which isn't, so we're getting the right messages out to the right groups of people that are doing it. But at the end of the day, they've got a consumer choice to make whether they tour New Zealand in a self-contained or non-self-contained vehicle. So we can certainly help there.
Are we doing that strongly enough?
I
mean, there's no point putting out little leaflets. It's actually being very clear that actually this is prohibited here.
Well, at the moment it's not prohibited here anywhere in our district, and that's where I think from a regulatory perspective a specific bylaw to manage prohibited areas. So you say some of the other TAs have actually said that these particular park areas, these particular reserve areas, these particular roads, freedom camping is not allowed to occur on. However, there's other parts where freedom camping can occur under particular sets of circumstances. And that's how it's been managed, and that gives a very clear direction. The difficulty sometimes with the likes of using our existing bylaws, so parks and reserves and traffic bylaws is, and there's a classic example up at Waimari Surf Club, actually half the car park where they have freedom camping, the parks and reserves bylaw applies, and the other half is the traffic bylaw. So, but to a consumer, to a resident, it looks like a car park, smells like a car park, is a car park. They don't understand the underlying rules. So that's where a bylaw that's specifically tailored in that way would help. Yeah.
Okay, I've got Glenn, then Jimmy. Are these still questions?
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Okay, just one for Anne. From your team's perspective, and in terms of compliance, what would a freedom camping bylaw enable your team actually to do on the ground?
More specifically, direct people to the places where freedom camping should be occurring, I think. Is, at the moment, we're in a bit of it's difficult. It's like moving all of those people from Beresford Street, saying you can't go here, this is not the right place for doing it, and then we find that that's just populated up in Waimari. We could go up to Waimari and say, don't park here, go somewhere else, and they'll go and find another local community. That's what's really difficult at the moment, is actually saying, well, here it could be that there's more obvious or prohibited places or prescribed places for that. There's also the opportunity for third parties to come into the market too, so there's actual market interest in actually providing a niche for freedom camping, this kind of activity that's in a camping ground type environment, but it's a new way of camping grounds in Christchurch. So there's also pushing them into those places.
Because at the moment it's like squeezing water in a balloon. They're just popping out somewhere else.
Yeah, somewhere else.
It's not,
And it's when they start congregating. You can see pockets of 2 or 3, but it's when it starts congregating, and the power of social media, it's really hard to move it along. Yeah.
Okay, Jimmy?
Thank you. I'm not sure, because if we review your information on page 455, you already have proposed a freedom camping bylaw timetable in here. And also, but you reply some my fellow councillors, if the established new bylaw is more kind of specific, more dealing with this the kind of issue, more effective. So what's your rationale? Still recommend the option 1 rather than the option 2 to establish the new bylaw?
The reason for recommending option 1 is because it has been very successful over the summer in terms of being able to address the issues as they emerged on a case-by-case basis. There are some, a freedom camping bylaw isn't going to solve every problem, and it will create, issues around having to. We still have to do just as much work as we're doing already, obviously, in order to deal with new issues as they emerge, because we haven't caught them within the bylaw. We'll amend the bylaw over time, of course, but you want to be able to respond quickly, which is what option 1 gives you that flexibility to do. There are pluses and minuses for both choices.
Okay. Second question. Okay. Yeah, quickly. Okay. But based on the estimate cost, option 1, you have specified on 454, the ongoing cost, part-time staff for monitor program, etc., $31,000, and plus lump sum $2,000 for the signage, etc. But how about option 2? Roughly estimate how much
Option
for the
2?
consultation, for the this kind of hearing, etc. Just roughly.
Roughly 50 to 60, perhaps, in that region, very roughly. It kind of depends on just how much policy. It's quite a policy-rich bylaw to develop. You might want to do quite a lot of connecting in with different councillors and community boards, clearly, who would have an interest in such a policy. There'd be a lot of, we want to do a lot of surveying and research to establish issues around the ability of the environment to cope, where are the best sites, where shouldn't it happen. So there's quite a bit of research. Demographics of our Freedom campers. So it could go higher than that. I wouldn't be surprised, actually.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to follow up on Pauline's question really, and that's around if we were to amend our current bylaws, would that perhaps give us breathing space, and would that I guess utilising knowledge and experience from other councils, would that be enough at this stage?
I'm not sure. Look, it hadn't even occurred to me to do that. I was looking specifically at other TAs who are dealing with freedom camping and what specific bylaws they've brought in, and we would have to look at how we could amend our traffic and parking bylaw to manage freedom camping. We're going to be faced with the same sorts of challenges. We're going to have to update the definitions so that freedom camping and bring all those sorts of things through and manage that. But it's still, I don't know whether it would mean that we would be looking at putting prohibited areas in or restricted areas in as well, which are provided for in the Freedom Camping Act as part of the bylaw. So, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, yeah. Option 1 is really partly also like exploring more, trying to explore what more we could do around using the existing regs and then reporting back on that. Whereas option 2 was Freedom Camping bylaw and then reporting back on that.
This and how you've spent your summer, would you actually favour a bylaw?
Actually, I would.
Right.
Yeah, and I just think it helps. The policing is really interesting because it's late, it's early, it's evening and early morning where you've got to capture it like that. But one of the best ways to do it is actually for people, freedom campers, to actually know and understand what they can and can't do. So that's why I would favour a bylaw. It's education in itself. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've got lots of bylaws, and sometimes it's quite hard to enforce bylaws, and you have to go through a whole process. So if you want to change behaviour, I really question whether a bylaw will actually change the behaviour. But accepting that, that's the advice that we've been given. I also wonder, in terms of the park rangers, whether we've got adequate staffing levels, and if we thought as a kind of interim solution between now and when the bylaw comes in, whether we're better to actually put that resource into the park rangers, who I think do a fantastic job already, but I know have, an increasing role to play in sort of education and awareness. So, is that, if we gave you, more FTEs, would that be something that would be useful in terms of that reassurance to the community, catching people when they, as we see on 5.8, we do have tools to give people infringement notices. So it's actually catching them that's the issue, because we get,
Can I talk to the first and then Kay talk? So that's the beauty of the Freedom Camping Act and our bylaw. There is the substantive piece of legislation does provide an infringement regime, which is not what we see in our other bylaws, which fall back onto the local government, which doesn't have an infringement regime. The other thing is there's a lot more wider powers under the Freedom Camping Act and under the duty of an authorised officer that can require people to move on, that can require people to provide, their names and addresses and all that sort of personal information to be able to better manage freedom camping and educate in that way. I'm not at all proposing that we use the stick approach and start slamming everybody with freedom camping, because I think education is the right thing to do first and then assist and direct people into the right places to freedom camp. But that's the beauty of this bylaw, or a bylaw, that we can bring some of those things in.
Adequate.
Yeah, and then
and thanks for noticing what our park rangers do, Yanni. But the beauty for us is the park rangers mainly work on parks and reserves, which are covered by the Parks and Reserves bylaw, and for freedom camping that is currently quite well controlled, which is quite different from what Anne's team has been working on, which is the areas on the roads and the streets, which is not covered. So the park rangers don't usually enforce on the road and the street as opposed to in the park.
Go for it.
When you say point them to the correct places to freedom camp, where are they?
At the moment, first and foremost, and it always is go to a camping ground and do that. And then if you get onto they all provide education around the particular freedom camping apps and things like that. They're all very well, it's very easy through social media to find out where the free sites are. The closest free site in Christchurch is actually Coes Ford, and you'll find that Coes Ford is very popular for freedom camping. It highlights all the camping grounds and all the right places to do that, and it also directs people in that way. Bearing in mind, the Freedom Camping Act allows freedom camping to occur anywhere unless it's prohibited or restricted in a local government area, and also in DOC land as well. So DOC also has a role to play around providing those kinds of campsites too.
What's wrong with the approach of just putting up no freedom camping in specific sites? So that at New Brighton, in that parking place where they're going, put one there. What's the difference between doing that and a bylaw? I mean, a bylaw seems to be a very big, overarching thing, which might, in my view, probably not that necessary when you can use signs in specific areas.
So the signs in the Beresford Street car park is quite a different scenario from a park or a reserve. It was actually council land from a titled piece of land, and council invoked its role as a property owner as opposed to a public property ownership like roads and parks and reserves. From putting signs up everywhere and requiring some, do we want signs everywhere around for our parks and reserves around where camping can and can't?
Hot spots though?
Yeah. Pardon?
Don't we just have hot spots, trouble spots?
They move. These hot spots move, and they move really quickly. Yeah, and that's what's happening now. Yeah.
Okay, I've got Jamie.
Yeah.